We are going to continue talking about relationship regulation theory and thinking about the point we started discussing last week, which is there are four models for relationships here, but they don't all work equally well for different kinds of relationships and given different kinds of goals. Now, individual people and cultures differ in which they use where and how they implement them, but they don't all equally work well. It's not to say the outcome of this is a total relativism. It is a kind of relativism. That is to say, whether a certain character trait is viewed as a virtue and whether a certain norm operates is going to depend on the model of the relationships that we're using. But still, there are better and worse models to use for understanding various relationships in various contexts. So this doesn't mean in the end just give up and be irrelevant. It's, yes, cultures vary a lot on this, but some do a lot better than others as a result of the models they use. So we have to think through what are the advantages and disadvantages of these various models. Last time we talked about communal sharing. So today I want to start talking about authority ranking and contemplating. And now I know to write, allow more space for the advantages, but also the disadvantages of viewing a certain relationship vertically in terms of an authority ranking. So lots of cultures do this for lots of different kinds of purposes. We've talked about some of the examples of it, but now let's think, for what kind of purpose does it work well? And what kinds of problems does it create? All of these models are going to be like this. We're not in the end going to say, aha, here's the right model. They all have advantages and disadvantages. They're all really useful for certain purposes, given certain goals, and really not very helpful for certain other kinds of relationships, certain other kinds of goals. So what's a good feature of an authority ranking? Yeah?
They're often very decisive.
Okay, good. When it's important to be decisive, these are very good. Okay, you've got one person in charge of making the decision, and they know they're in charge of making the decision, they can do that. Last time we talked about communal sharing relationships and how difficult it can be to reach consensus and make a decision. And this is one way of doing it. You have that person appointed to be the decision maker, and they make the decision. So that's, decisions do tend to get made that way, provided that the person in charge is decisive. You can see that leadership and decisiveness are going to be associated because having somebody really indecisive as a leader can be very frustrating. Yeah?
I don't know how to word this, but like everybody kind of knows their role.
Ah, okay, good. So yeah, there is generally a clarity of role. I know what my job is. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know what directive I'm supposed to be following. So yeah, the structure of things, goals and so on, can be found here. Other things.
So I was going to say it helps like with confusion, like everyone kind of knows who to like look to.
Okay, good. So yeah, we not only have a clarity of role, but you might say a clarity of, of structure, so I know who to look to, right? If I have an unclear notion of my role, I know where to go to find out how to do it. Okay? I might, for example, feel unclear about my role as a professor. Now, for the most part, I'm an idiot if I'm unclear about my role, right? In most respects, it's pretty obvious. But in some respects, it might not be that obvious. I became aware last year of some of the kinds of cases that our Office of, oh gosh, look at that. I think the sleet is turning to snow.
Yay.
That's, I guess, better. And yes, I'm still in Texas. But anyway, yeah, there's a sort of, how can I put it? An office here, an Office of Institutional Equity, and they send around emails talking about bias incident reports and so on, whatever that's called. Every year it gets a new name. But anyway, I was hearing a presentation a year ago on the various kinds of cases they have dealt with. And some of them do, it seems to me, involve professors who do not understand their proper role or the proper role of a teaching assistant. Asking their teaching assistant to babysit their kids, for example, or go pick up their dry cleaning, or this kind of thing. And it's like, wait, no, that's not that's not what your supervisory relationship allows you to do, and that's not their role, and that's not your role, and so on. So there can be aspects of roles that can remain unclear even within a structure, and even when the role is actually pretty simple. But there are people who are in the structure who, can help to clarify that, and can say to somebody, no, that's not your proper role. So yeah, we tend to have a clarity of role, a clarity of structure. You know who you report to, right? Who is, going to give you directions. And if there's a structure that leaves that unclear, where you're reporting to two different people, let's say, that's a dangerous sort of situation. It's a bad structure, because then you can think, wait, this person wants me to do this one wants me to do that. They're both, in a sense, my boss, and now I'm kind of in trouble. What are some other features of this? You want to get them.
They both said what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Well, new ideas. What are advantages, or for that matter, disadvantages of this? Yeah.
I don't know how to word this, but it's kind of like a diffusion responsibility. Like communal sharing kind of has this, but it's like for one person. Like the leader takes responsibility.
Ah, okay, good. So there is a clarity of responsibility generally that goes along with this. You know what you're responsible for, you know who's in charge of something. In that sense, too, there's a greater degree of accountability, right? If things go wrong, and we've been operating through a consensus communal sharing sort of arrangement, in the end you can say, gosh, we didn't really do very well there, did we? But whose fault is that? It might be quite unclear. I may have told some of you in previous classes the story of our philosophy department softball team when I was a grad student. We always lost. I mean, we were terrible. But it was okay. Every time we would go to a certain bar in Pittsburgh and sit around and blame each other for this. So we'd sit there and, we'd be like, if only you had caught that ball at third base that I threw in, we would have won the game. And I said, well, if only you had thrown it decently. And somebody else would go, well, if only you had gotten the hit when we had bases loaded. But, it was this type of thing. Anyway, one time we won. We actually won. I don't know what happened. Actually, there were 2 games we won that season. And one, it was a forfeit. The other two didn't show up. But there was one game we legitimately won. And so we got to the bar afterwards, and we were sitting there for about 20 minutes. People were just kind of staring at their beers. Nobody was saying anything. And finally somebody said, why is nobody saying anything? We won. We should be happy. And somebody finally said, we have nobody to blame. We actually won. Okay, but notice, on a team like that, it is kind of a communal sharing. Each of us has a certain role. I was supposed to be playing third base and so on and so forth. But in the end, okay, you lose. Whose fault is that? Everybody has their own theory of whose fault that was. But in this kind of structure, it's pretty clear where the responsibility lies. Hey, you had that job. You didn't do your job. Maybe you've seen those memes. You had one job, right? And you know whose job it is. You know who screwed up. And maybe, there's this issue about, well, but I was ordered to do it, blah, blah, blah. It was really my boss's fault. But still, there's a very clear chain, and you know to locate responsibility in the chain. And so if there's any unclarity, it's just how far up or how far down it goes. Some other features, yeah?
It's highly scalable for large organizations.
Okay, good. This is terrific for large organizations. Communal sharing works well in a small group, right? A nuclear family, let's say. You can share a lot of things, and that's fine. Or 2 or 3 roommates can share various things in their apartment. Works out. But in a large organization, how do you reach consensus? How do you just share without having a massive free rider problem? And how do you actually make decisions? If you've got 2 or 3 people and you're trying to decide something, you can sort it out kind of by consensus. But suppose you have 2,000 or 3,000 people, as we do on the faculty here. How would you sort that out among the faculty? I was on faculty council, and that's only about 100 faculty members. But I can tell. It's a disaster. Okay. And trying to get a decision out of a faculty group like that is basically hopeless. Imagine 2,000 to 3,000 people in that room trying to reach consensus. Forget it. And so in large organizations, This gives you a way of structuring things and making decisions and assigning responsibility that's almost inevitable. How do you possibly do it once you get over a certain size group in other ways? Yeah,
It allows for vertical or horizontal movement in an organization.
good. You can move up, move down, move across, and so on. And so you might say this allows for a career path. And that's important to motivation. You can actually rise in the organization. You can get greater responsibility. You can move horizontally and learn different features of it. You might say, well, okay, I've been doing this kind of assignment, but I would really like to be involved in that. And there's a chance for that kind of horizontal move so you can adapt, you can learn new skills, you can use better the skills you have, and so on. And so in short, people can be motivated to keep learning, to keep advancing. And it's pretty hard to do that in other kinds of settings. So if you've got a setting which is, for example, communal, well, you all hunt together, let's say, in a hunter-gatherer type situation. What really motivates you to become a better hunter? Whereas here, we've got something that's like, you're an assistant hunter. You could rise to be an associate hunter, then a full-fledged hunter. And maybe someday, you can get the chair in hunting. And, all of those things might actually give you motivation to keep improving and going up that career ladder. Other features, advantages, maybe some disadvantages.
The compartmentalization of information.
Okay, good. Information is compartmentalized. And what does that mean? That means you can actually maintain secrets, for example, much better than this, okay? You can get information to the people who need it, but keep it away from people who don't need it. And so you might say control of information is an important feature of this. Now, at times, you might think, maybe that's not so good. That works against transparency. But in a lot of settings, that can be important because some things really do need to be kept private. And so this kind of structure is pretty good for maintaining privacy, for keeping secrets. For example, in the military, imagine if all military decisions were just made by consensus. First of all, it'd be enormously hard to do that. Hey guys, the battle's not going well, what do we do? Right? You're going to be dead before you figure it out, for one thing. For another thing, you're going to have a discussion that involves everybody. It means everybody has the information, which means it's going to leak out, and the enemy's going to find out what you're up to. So if secrecy, and that's often true, not only in the military, but in business organizations, you don't want your competitor to know what you're planning to do. And so this kind of structure is very good for maintaining control over information. Any other advantages of this?
I was going to say for a disadvantage,
yeah.
not everyone's equal. Some people are lesser than others.
That's right. Okay, good. There is significant inequality here, right? Some people have a lot more power, a lot more position, a lot more authority than others. There is, in all cultures, the sense that greater authority and being higher in the hierarchy entitles you to more stuff, or to stuff sooner. You get paid more, you have more control, more authority, more power. You get more things, you have a bigger office, etc. And though not a better parking space, I used to. I worked my way up from the most distant lots to the spaces right in front of the building. And then they built a building. Now, I take the bus. Oh well. But anyway, there is this inequality that is built into the structure. And so, now that leads to an interesting question, because even if everybody agrees that to some degree that's appropriate, how much of it is appropriate, right? What is it appropriate for the president or the CEO or the vice president of blah, 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 or whatever in the organization to be paid, as opposed to the low-level workers? What's an appropriate gradation? And there can be a lot of disagreement about that. Some people might say, well, I'm fine with a little inequality, I'm not fine with a big inequality. Other people can say, no, look, that person has a huge amount of authority, they deserve a lot more, and so on and so forth. And so this can easily not only become, in general, a question, you might say, there's the moral question of fairness here. But there's also the question of possible resentment. If people feel that the inequalities are too large, they can start thinking, hey, wait, that's not right. And whether they're correct about that or not, it can start harming the organization. That people feel as if, wait a minute, this isn't right. Yeah.
I feel like it has the potential to incentivize like antisocial behavior, because you see that a lot. Like, oh, most CEOs are sociopaths, or there's a greater prevalence of
Oh, right.
sociopathy at higher levels.
Yeah. So, is this something that can encourage antisocial behaviors? Psychologists have sometimes found things like this. There is a chapter of Hayek's famous book, The Road to Serfdom, entitled simply Why the Worst Rise to the Top. And he's talking about government organizations specifically, but actually it applies to all bureaucratic organizations. His point is that basically these organizations tend to select for and promote people with antisocial tendencies who are willing to step on the people below them and willing to expand their own authority and so on at the expense of the actual purpose of the organization. And so his point is, look, the bureaucracy might start with people who are really dedicated to addressing health concerns or eliminating poverty or whatever the goal of this social organization is or this company is. It doesn't really matter whether it's for-profit or non-profit or whatever. And increasingly, they get replaced in the hierarchy and displaced by the people who are most interested in power for its own sake. And so in the end, you find the organization increasingly run by people who just want power and who have little interest in the health of the company or the profitability of the company or actually eliminating poverty or improving public health or whatever it happens to be. And there is a real danger in that, right? Because it motivates people, but what kinds of motivations does it give? And how do you identify who rises? Yeah.
Some people abuse their power, like having people do stuff that's not turning into like their job, or just like delegating everything that they're supposed to be doing to somebody else.
That's right, good. Once you rise into a position of authority like that, it can be hard for people to exercise good supervision of you. And maybe if you're at the top, there is nobody to supervise you, right? And so it enables abuse of power. Power corrupts, as Lord Acton said. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you might think, well, even within a typical organization, power corrupts to some extent. You suddenly find yourself with authority over people. And unless there's a check on you, there's a real problem. Last term in business ethics, I assigned my students the Wells Fargo case as a case study to write about. And it was a case where, although there was a hierarchy, it was very decentralized. A lot of things were not really under the control of top management at headquarters. And so there were these little fiefdoms all over the company. It had come about due to the fact that the company grew so much by acquiring other companies and more or less allowed them to continue running things on their own without much check. And some of these turned into cases where there was serious abuse of power. In some of the branches, for example, people had to create new accounts in order to not be fired, in order to get promoted and so on. And some of the managers actually had their employees run a gauntlet at the end and write their sales numbers on a board. And they publicly humiliated the people who came in last. I take part in trivia contests for fun, and last night I won. Very rare thing, though I knew almost nothing. I was just with a guy who was really good. But anyway, the point is this. That sort of thing is tough, right? And what if, in the trivia thing, at the end they took the lowest 2 or 3 teams and made them stand up and made fun of them, right? I mean, you'd lose your audience very quickly, right? And so that kind of thing was going on. And it can go on in all sorts of organizations. And it can be hard to check that kind of thing. Now this and this connected to something, which is, okay, why isn't there more supervision? So we can say, yeah, don't these people have to answer to someone else? Well, now we have a problem. How do you determine how the people below you are doing? How do you? Let's say you're the boss, and a new position comes up, you've got somebody under you, you're going to promote. How do you determine who the best person is for that promotion?
Recommendations and like reports.
Recommendations, reports from whom?
People that work with them, like peer reviews and stuff like that.
Okay, good. You might ask their peers. A lot of people have a sort of 360 review where they ask the people who might work for them as well what they think of them and so on. So you can try to get information like that, and that's a good way to do things. But yeah,
how likely they're, or how well they're likely to do at the job. So they could be really great in this position, but given control of more people, they may not be able to manage it.
good. You've got to project not just how well they're doing now, but how well they'll do in this new job. The Peter Principle basically says people are promoted to their level of incompetence because, you're doing a really good job here, so we'll make you one of these. You're doing a good job there, well, you're not really very good here, so you stay there. And so basically organizations get filled with people who aren't very good at their jobs, is the idea. And there is a real danger of that, right? Because it's very hard to project who is going to be the most suited to the next level. Yeah.
I was actually going to propose that as another disadvantage. The Peter Principle or tendency of people to feel awkward.
Right, good. I think in general, it's a question of performance evaluation. And you're right. I mean, it can easily lead to the Peter Principle, where you have this sort of question of, look, the place gets filled with, if not sociopaths, at least incompetent people. Yes.
I've heard of the Peter Principle. Can you tell us more about the background and like the studies that have been done on it? And honestly, like, why is it a Peter Principle?
Yeah, I think it was thought of by a management consultant, Lawrence Peter, who came up with this idea. And there are a number of these principles and laws that people have developed over time that to some extent have been studied in the literature and to some extent are part of the folklore. And indeed, this principle got to be part of the folklore long before anybody started actually doing serious studies of it. But the idea really is that performance evaluations, first of all, are difficult because it's hard to get the relevant information. Now sometimes, and in some settings, it's pretty easy. Let's say you've got a bunch of people on your lot selling cars. You can tell who sells the most cars, right? Or maybe you've got a bunch of computer programmers doing more or less similar tasks, and you find that this person is doing a lot more than other people. And so on. So sometimes you can tell very clearly who is excelling because there's a pretty direct quantitative measure of what they're doing. But in a lot of settings, it's not like that. We tried to do something like that on the faculty by having student evaluations, but there's a huge amount of variation in those. And the extent to which they're reliable, I'm really not sure. Mine vary from term to term, and I think, well, did I do better this term or worse that term? Sometimes I think, yeah, that worked really well, and that wasn't so good. But other times I think, well, I don't get it. I mean, it was like the same class. Why did I get a 4.6 there and a 4.4 here? I don't know. And so in short, they're kind of imprecise, and a lot of performance measures that people use are imprecise. One problem that Fisk identifies is that a lot of times the evaluation comes from information the employee him or herself provides. And so it's like, tell me how you've been doing. And you say, well, I've been doing great. Well, very good. Right? And I mean, it's a little bit, look, I've served on dozens of search committees here looking for new faculty members. And one of the things I learned pretty quickly to basically ignore is any evidence in the files about teaching. Now you might think, why? Is it because we're a research university and we don't care about teaching? No, it's because you get no information. Because everybody who has any teaching experience at all goes over their files and they pick out the best teaching evaluations they have. And in short, it's like Lake Wobegon. Everybody looks above average, okay? And occasionally you find somebody who is just outstanding. And you think, whoa, okay, this person's really, really special. Occasionally you find somebody who can't even come up with anything that's above average. And you think, oh, this person must be terrible. But basically, so in 100 files, one looks outstanding, one or two look terrible, but then The other 97 are all kind of like above average. And you just don't learn anything from that. So I learned, ignore it. Just get into the interview and ask them questions and see if they can explain anything. And that's the best indicator of this. But a lot of times performance evaluations give you that kind of problem. People pick out the things that make them all look above average. And indeed, in lots of organizations, it's kind of like, yeah, everybody looks above average. And sometimes that's right. Like they're all doing their job pretty well. But it can make it very hard then to decide if you've got one spot to promote somebody to who deserves it. Yeah.
And that's also a problem in the hiring process, isn't it? Because like for example, recommendations, you can just pick and choose. I know these people are gonna say great things about me, and then the interview, what are your weaknesses? And then people are like, oh, I work too hard. And then
Yes. Okay, good, yes. Exactly. You have references, but if you don't, by the time you're applying for jobs, know 2 or 3 people who think well of you, then okay, that's a problem. But you hope you do, and then everybody has these 2 or 3 people who think well of them, right? Now, it's interesting how different things evolve. In business, references can basically be very tough to use in the evaluation process for just that reason. Again, everybody looks above average. I found that in different areas of philosophy, it's a bit like that. In continental philosophy, it's kind of like that. All of the letters for continental candidates more or less describe their dissertation and say it's interesting work, the end. And it's like, well, yeah, but how good is it? Now, in analytic philosophy, people are much more willing to make judgments. And so they'll say, this is the best student I've had in 10 years. Or they'll say, I would compare this person to these people who have recently been on the job market. They give very precise evaluations. Now, they're often highly inflated evaluations. So, the one, it's as if people were quoting prices. And the one group in continental philosophy says, it's a good deal, but they won't tell you the price. In analytic philosophy, they'll tell you the price very exactly, but you don't know what the currency is. Oh, the price is $24.95. Wait, dollars? US, Canadian, pounds, pesos? What are we talking here, right? Because you don't know how that person is and how basically inflated their opinions are. Anyway, it makes that kind of thing really difficult. All right, well, other sorts of advantages and disadvantages. Yeah.
Is it an advantage if you highly efficient division of labor, so everybody doesn't have to learn HR and programming and PR at the same time?
Okay, good. So we have a division of labor here. I thought I was allowing a lot more room, maybe not. Now, Marx thought the division of labor was the source of all evil, but in general, people think, no, it's a good thing. Why? Well, it lets you become good at this. You don't have to do everything, right? You can be the person in the kitchen who becomes the expert in desserts, or let's say, and you're probably going to make a better dessert than if that's just one of many things you're doing. The same thing applies in organizations. You don't have to learn the accounting and the HR stuff and this particular coding task and blah, 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 blah. You can just get really good at one of those. Similarly, in the university, we specialize and teach not just in our department, but then usually some subset of the courses in that department. And we get good at that. If you suddenly say, well, we're just all going to teach whatever. So, Automac, next term you're teaching 17th century French poetry and quantum physics. Be like, whoa, okay, good luck with that. And so, yeah, that kind of division of labor allows for a sort of specialization and a greater development of expertise that enables people to accomplish a lot more in a lot of sense. Yeah.
One disadvantage, I think, is it can close off perspectives and one person's making the decisions instead of hearing what other people say.
Okay, that's a good point. We can get limited perspectives. For example, we mentioned a moment ago, you might ask peers and people even working for people to evaluate them and be involved. That sort of 360 all-around evaluation. But that's still kind of unusual. Most organizations do not do that. Which means that if you think about the structure of the organization, it tends to look a bit like this, right? Much wider at the bottom. And most of the decisions are happening here at the top. Well, how much interaction is there between the people at the top and the people lower down? They can become very isolated. And in some companies, you will find there's a physical separation. My wife, for example, spent a lot of years with a corporation that at a certain point decided that all the executives would be moved up to the top floor. And the rest of the people were not really allowed on the top floor. In fact, one guy got fired because he kept going up on the top floor and stealing one of the vice president's lunches.
Oh.
Okay? That's a good way to, don't do that, okay? But in any case, there was actually a sort of line there, and you know, that means it's real, first of all, people with a very limited perspective on things are making all the decisions. This looks like the thing on the dollar bill. Look great. But it's not just that. If there's not much information flowing between these people and the people down below, and at Wells Fargo, for example, that's what happened. The people at the very top of headquarters had no idea that people were being forced to run gauntlets and so on and so forth. And so did not really know what was happening in their own organization. And it's easy for that kind of thing to happen. It can happen in society in general, where a small oligarchy starts running things, but it can happen within any given organization. Other advantages or disadvantages, yeah.
I guess in addition to limited perspectives, those limited perspectives have like unlimited consequences. So like the fact that they have all decision-making power means if you have some incompetence at the top, that just screws over everyone on the bottom.
Oh, good. Okay, yes. We've got, notice here that a flat sort of organization, as in communal sharing or equality matching or some others, allows for the failure of one part, not really to affect the other parts all that much. Here, failure at the bottom may not affect many people, but failure at the top can affect a lot of people, right? So, yes, what's a good label to put on that? I'll borrow a term from Taleb. We're going to come back to this later in the course. This can promote a kind of fragility, where the failure of one part starts affecting the whole, right? And insofar as it's a very top-down structure, then any kind of badness at the top very quickly starts affecting a lot down below. You might think, in fact, there's a sort of mathematical structure to this, something called an ideal in algebra, of the people who end up reporting to a given person. At the very least, all of those people might be affected if that person is incompetent or malicious in some way. And indeed, I've been part of organizations with a malicious person like that. And it has an effect on everybody who works below them. And it can poison a good organization very, very quickly. The good thing is once you identify that and get rid of that person, then things can improve dramatically very quickly. But still, one bad apple can really ruin a lot of that's going on. And so that one of the puzzles that Taleb is going to talk about and we'll think about when we get to strategy questions is how do you structure an organization to retain a lot of these advantages, but try to make it anti-fragile? So that not only is it not in danger from the failure of a part, but maybe it actually grows stronger as a result of dealing with the failure of a part and unexpected problems and so on. But yeah, this kind of hierarchical structure can promote a sort of fragility that becomes dangerous. Other things, yes?
There's a slowness to information. If it needs to move vertically, it has to go to the top and back down again, which is the problem with communist governments, where somebody has to decide how much a bread is going to cost, other than instead of just you deciding with the buyer.
Right, good. We've said this can be decisive. And yet if you think about complex bureaucratic organizations, they're not usually models of decisive decision-making, right? Or rapid response or whatever. And why? Part of it is information flows slowly. Part of it is that, well, a lot of people might lie between the problem and then the actual decision that needs to be made, right? So you're absolutely right. There can be a slow procedural, I'll just say decisions can become a slow procedural nightmare. And that may be a dramatic way of putting it. But bureaucracies often become entangled in rules, in just the number of people involved in the process, and so on, and the complexity of the organization. There is something simple, in a way, about an unstructured communal sharing setup. You know, the roommates are trying to decide on some issue that roommates face. You don't say, well, let's consult the rule book. Unless your roommate is Sheldon Cooper on the Big Bang Theory, then you have an extensive rule book, right? But ordinarily, you don't need that. You don't have to do that. Whereas in an organization like this, you have the Regents' rules, you have the Handbook of Operating Procedures, you have all sorts of other things. I mean, when I was chairman, I had printed out copies of these that were current, and they're big and fat notebooks like this. And so you think, okay, what has to happen here? You go through the rules and blah, 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 blah. And then for each rule, turns out there are big memos that outline guidelines for implementing the rule. And that's simple compared to, for example, tax law. Yeah.
Yeah, just, I'm complaining about the rules real quick, but a lot of the institutional rules, they'll get updated every semester, so you have to reread them if you want to know what's going on. And,
Yes, no, it can become a nightmare. And in fact, I've watched that happen at universities where they become more and more complicated. Yeah, this kind of complexity of rules, they can simply become rule bound. And that's a real problem. Any other advantages or disadvantages to authority ranking structures? Yeah.
a disadvantage could be, we've covered stuff similar to this, but not this precisely. You just have bias on behalf of the people in charge, and that can lead to further incompetence. Bias for just random reasons.
Okay, good. Bias, and in general you might say unpredictability. When you say random reasons, yeah. Okay? What happens to you may depend on what that person up above decides. What will they decide? Who knows, right? You may think, look, yes, they might have a particular bias against me, against people like me, against this particular question that's arising here. They may have a strong view about this that's quirky. They may be just in a bad mood that day. There can be a huge amount of unpredictability. You are dependent on the decisions of the people above you, and you may not know what they're going to be. Now, the rules are meant to try to get things more predictable, but how will they pay attention to the rules? Do they even know what the rules are? Quite often I get the sense the rules are so complicated the people in charge of them don't know what they are either. And if that's true, then, gosh, what's going to be the outcome of that process? You know? Maybe some of you have been in the position of saying, hey, I took this course at another college. Will you give me credit for one here? It's a total crapshoot as far as I can tell. There are some principles, but in the end it's going to depend on some nameless person in some office. And they're just going to say yes or no. And there's very little you or any faculty member can do about it. And so there's a huge amount of unpredictability. And anyway, the bigger the organization, the more you get susceptible to that kind of problem. Okay, well, we've spent lots of time on this. Anything else on authority ranking relationships? Yeah?
I don't know if this is an advantage or disadvantage, but like how personal a relationship is. So,
yeah, say more.
So like in a communal sharing, it's like pretty personal. Like whenever something does something wrong, you take it like as a like threat to yourself. Versus authority ranking, it's less like that. It's like, oh, it's just because the system crap, or like you only trust like certain authorities' opinion about you.
Right, right. Okay, good. We've said that a lot of relationships in the real world are mixtures of the models. And that's true in all of these models. But, you know, in communal sharing, since you have to come up with a consensus among the group, well, it's important that you have decent relationships with a lot of people in the group. Here, you might think, gosh, some of these relationships are going to be mixed with personal friendships and other kinds of things. Others aren't. That's going to have an impact here, right? So, in some ways, that can be a good thing, but partly because you're trying to deal with predictability, or from the top down, you're trying to figure out who can actually do this job, and dealing with these questions, a lot depends on that kind of personal relationship and personal trust. And from one point of view, that's people's ways of trying to improve this situation. But from another point of view, you might say, gosh, it's hard to figure out what those informal networks that supplement the official network are. And if you're a newcomer, or people don't like you for some reason, right, that can make it even much more difficult to negotiate. Yeah.
I think it's kind of like what you're saying earlier, I guess just because it's a large organization, maybe not necessarily because it's authority ranking, but you end up with, some nameless person in the tower and you don't know who they are, how they're gonna act, but you don't have a personal relationship with these people necessarily. I feel like that's more a function of the size of the organization and the power structure, but.
Well, that's true. It often is a question of size. So you might say, look, it's not the authority ranking aspect of this that makes this problematic. It's the fact that the larger the organization is, the more you're going to know just a subset of the people involved. And that's going to give you, ideally, a better relationship with those people. Maybe not, depending on your relationship with them. But it's the kind of thing that then becomes, it interacts here with the authority structure in a certain kind of way. Now, that kind of thing can be a threat to other structures too. Within communal sharing, it may allow a certain clique to take over, right? You can get the mean girls running the school, even though it's all officially done by consensus. And the same thing might happen in an equality matching relationship. It's kind of like, oh yeah, all the siblings are equal, but actually these two gang up against everybody else. And so, it's not unique to the authority ranking relationship. What does, you might say, make it have a special character here is that it does increase, in a lot of ways, the unpredictability of this. If you've got a good relationship with that person, maybe it becomes more predictable for you. But if you don't know what that informal structure is, or you don't have a good relationship with the person, then it makes it even more unpredictable, because somebody else who has a different goal might have that relationship. And you thought, hey, you made a really good case for this. Yeah, but it turns out the dean is a really good friend of that person, who was also competing for that grade. It's like, oh. So that's the kind of thing that can make this have unanticipated effects here that it might not have in other kinds of structures.